Chapter 1. The summer festival was Giselle's least favorite day of the year. It wasn't the noise that bothered her, though the village square was filled with drunken laughter and off-key singing. Nor was it the heat, though sweat trickled down her back as she maneuvered through the crowd with a tray of empty mugs. No, what Giselle hated was the reminder of how little had changed. Another year gone, and she was still serving ale at her father's tavern, still counting coppers, still watching younger girls being courted while she remained firmly on the shelf at 23. 3 more ales for the blacksmith's table, her father called over the din. Giselle nodded, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. The tavern was packed to the rafters, every villager in Meadowvale eager to celebrate the one day a year when Lord Vashael's collectors distributed gold instead of demanding it. "Did you hear?" Old Martha leaned across the bar, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They say the Lord himself might attend this year." Giselle snorted as she filled the mugs from a wooden barrel. "The Ancient One hasn't shown his face in 50 years. Why would he start now?" "Because," Martha's eyes gleamed with excitement, "2 of his kind were seen in the western woods yesterday. Fae nobility, with those strange horses that leave no tracks. Maybe he's finally tired of hiding in that stone fortress." Giselle handed over the drinks without comment. Stories about Lord Vashael were as common as cobblestones and twice as dull. In her lifetime, he'd been rumored to be everything from a shapeshifter who walked among them in disguise, to a withered husk kept alive only by dark magic. The truth, her grandmother insisted, was far more mundane. Lord Vashael was simply old, even by Fae standards, and preferred solitude to the company of humans he would outlive by centuries. Giselle stepped outside for a breath of air, the weight of responsibilities momentarily lifted from her shoulders. The village square had been transformed for the festival, with summer flowers strung between cottages and paper lanterns waiting to be lit at dusk. Children raced between market stalls, faces sticky with honeyed treats. It would be beautiful, if only she could enjoy it. But with 5 younger siblings to feed and a father whose lungs grew weaker with each passing winter, Giselle's dreams had long ago been sacrificed on the altar of practicality. A hush fell over the square. The sudden silence was so absolute that Giselle could only hear the flutter of banners in the gentle breeze. Then she saw them. 4 riders on white horses that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon sunlight, their hooves making no sound as they approached the village square. 3 riders wore armor of silver that reflected the sun painfully, their faces obscured by helmets fashioned to resemble snarling beasts. But it was the central figure that drew every eye. He was massive, taller than any man Giselle had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to cast shadows. Unlike his guards, his face was bare, revealing features so perfect they seemed carved from marble. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that even at this distance appeared entirely black, like holes cut into the fabric of the world. His hair, so pale it was nearly white, fell past his shoulders in a straight cascade, contrasting sharply with the midnight blue of his silk robes. The pointed tips of his ears peeked through the silver-white strands, confirming what everyone already knew. Lord Vashael, ancient Fae and ruler of the lands for over 1,000 years, had broken his long isolation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Giselle found herself moving forward, drawn by an invisible force. The ground beneath her feet felt unsteady. "Humans of Meadowvale," Lord Vashael's voice carried over the square, deep yet somehow hollow. "I bring gifts in return for your loyal devotion." The Ancient One's gaze swept across the gathered villagers, his expression revealing nothing. When those black eyes passed over Giselle, she felt a jolt of something: recognition, fear, wonder, a mix of so many different emotions that it stole her breath away. The air between them seemed to vibrate, making Giselle's skin prickle and her heart race. Lord Vashael's perfect composure cracked, his pale lips parting in surprise. Without warning, a searing pain shot through Giselle's left palm. She cried out, clutching her hand to her chest as a pattern of crimson lines bloomed across her skin, intricate whorls forming a perfect circle. Across the square, Lord Vashael raised his own hand, staring at his palm with disbelief. "No," he whispered, the single word carrying an eternity of refusal. "Not now, not after all this time." The armored Fae shifted uneasily, hands moving to the hilts of their swords. The crowd edged backward. Only Giselle remained frozen in place, her marked palm throbbing in time with her racing pulse. Lord Vashael's black eyes found hers once more, and this time, there was no mistaking the emotion that flashed across his perfect features. Horror. Pure undiluted horror. The crowd parted like water as Lord Vashael dismounted. His midnight blue robes billowed around him as he strode toward Giselle, each step leaving frost patterns on the cobblestones despite the summer heat. "Stand back," he commanded, and the villagers scrambled to obey, pressing against the walls of nearby buildings. Only Giselle's father moved against the tide, stumbling forward on weakened legs. "My lord, what is happening to my daughter?" The Ancient One didn't spare him a glance. "She is marked," She comes with me now. No. Her father's protest ended in a racking cough. You can't just take her. I can, Lord Vashael said flatly. And I must. Giselle found her voice at last. I don't understand. She held up her palm, the crimson mark pulsing in time with her heartbeat. What is this? What's happening? His face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. The sacred bond, he said. A rare magic, ancient even by my standards. It appears we are. His mouth twisted as if the word tasted foul. Mated. A gasp rose from the crowd. Giselle's vision swam. Mated? To this creature who had ruled their land since before her great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were born? There must be some mistake, she whispered, though the burning in her palm suggested otherwise. There is no mistake, Lord Vashael said without an ounce of emotion. The mark does not lie. He extended his own hand, palm upward, revealing an identical crimson pattern. You will come with me to my estate, he continued, as if discussing the weather rather than the upheaval of her entire existence. Preparations will be made. I can't just leave, Giselle protested, clutching her skirt so tightly that her knuckles went white. My family depends on me. My father is ill. My siblings. They can be provided for. Name your price. Giselle blinked. My price? For your cooperation? Gold? Security for your family? Name it, so we may depart. This discussion grows tiresome. The casual dismissal of her life and concerns sparked something in Giselle. Tiresome? She repeated. Forgive me, my lord, if the sudden destruction of my entire life inconveniences you. The Ancient One's eyes widened fractionally, perhaps the first genuine surprise he'd shown in centuries. One of his armored guards made a strangled sound that might have been shock or suppressed laughter. You dare speak to me thus? Lord Vashael's voice dropped dangerously low. I dare because apparently I'm stuck with you, Giselle shot back, beyond caring about consequences. And if we're truly mated, then I deserve better than to be treated like a piece of furniture you've reluctantly purchased. For a long moment, Lord Vashael simply stared at her, his black eyes unreadable. Then one corner of his mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile, but perhaps the memory of one. Very well, he said. You may state your terms before we depart. Giselle's mind raced. If she truly had no choice but to go with him, she could at least ensure her family's security. I want my father healed completely, she said, and an allowance provided for my family that will keep them in comfort for the rest of their lives. Lord Vashael nodded once. Granted. And education for my siblings. Real education, with teachers and books and stuff. Is that all? Giselle straightened her spine. No. I also want protection and prosperity for all of Meadowvale. No more collectors, and better protection from bandits. You bargain for strangers? They're not strangers. They're my people. Lord Vashael studied her for a long moment, his expression impossible to read. Finally, he nodded. Your terms are acceptable, though unexpected. I had forgotten that humans sometimes think beyond their immediate kin. He turned to address the villagers. Hear me, humans of Meadowvale. This woman is now under my protection, as are all of you by extension. The collection has ended. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, followed by hesitant cheers that quickly grew in volume. Giselle felt a surge of triumph, quickly tempered by the reality of what awaited her. She'd secured a future for her family and village, but at what personal cost? I'll need to say goodbye, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. And gather my things. You need nothing from this place, Lord Vashael replied dismissively. All will be provided. That's not the point. These are the people I love. I deserve a proper farewell. Something flickered in the depths of his black eyes, recognition, perhaps, or a long-buried memory of what it meant to care for others. 1 hour, he conceded. No more. He turned away, his guards following behind him. The mark on her palm throbbed, a reminder of the bond that now tied her to the ancient fearsome creature who had just purchased her cooperation. Yet beneath her fear lurked something else, something she was reluctant to examine too closely. A strange, unwelcome flutter in her stomach whenever those dark eyes met hers. She was afraid of Lord Vashael, but some treacherous part of her was drawn to him. True to his word, Lord Vashael returned precisely 1 hour later. Giselle had spent the time in a blur of tearful goodbyes. Her father had begged her not to go, then begged to accompany her, then finally collapsed into resigned silence when she explained the terms she'd negotiated. You've always been too clever for your own good, he embraced her with frail arms. Your mother would be proud. Her youngest sister, only 8, hadn't understood it all. But when will you be back? She kept asking, until Giselle had to admit that she didn't know. Now she stood at the edge of the village square, a small bundle of keepsakes and clothes clutched in her hands. Lord Vashael raised an eyebrow at the pitiful package but said nothing. Instead, he extended his hand. We travel not by horse, but by wind, he explained when she hesitated. Take my hand or the journey will dismember you. Giselle swallowed hard and placed her hand in his. His skin was cool but not cold, firm and smooth like polished stone. His fingers closed around hers, causing a tingle of warmth to race up her arm. The world passed in a blur, speeding past so fast that Giselle thought that she would be ill. Giselle gasped, her knees buckling as solid ground reappeared beneath her feet. Only Lord Vashael's swift arm around her waist kept her from collapsing. Many find the first passage difficult, he said, continuing to support her until her breathing steadied. When Giselle could finally focus on her surroundings, her breath caught for entirely different reasons. They stood in a vast entrance hall made from white marble, so highly polished that their reflections stared back at them from the floor. Columns soared upward, disappearing into shadow, each one carved to resemble a tree with branches that spread across the ceiling. Tiny points of light, like captured stars, dotted the stone canopy above. "Welcome to my estate," Lord Vashael said, releasing her. "A servant will show you to your chambers." As if summoned by his words, a tall figure glided toward them. At first glance, Giselle thought it was human. Then she noticed the two fluid movements, the eyes that reflected light like a cat's, the fingers that were just slightly too long. "This is Lysandra," Lord Vashael said. "She will attend to your needs." The Fae woman bowed, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders. "My lord, and honored guest?" She glanced at Vashael. "She bears the mark," he said flatly. "See that she is suitably attired and instructed in basic protocol before the evening meal." Without another word or glance at Giselle, he strode away, his robes billowing behind him. Lysandra's eyes widened. Her gaze dropped to Giselle's hand, where the crimson mark was clearly visible. "The sacred bond," she whispered with fear and awe. "After all these centuries, so everyone keeps saying," Giselle muttered. "Though no one bothers to explain what it actually means. You truly don't know? The sacred bond is the rarest of Fae magics, a connection forged by fate itself. Legend says it appears only once in 1,000 years, binding two souls who are destined to balance each other." Giselle thought of Lord Vashael's cold demeanor, his dismissive attitude, and his obvious distaste for their connection. "He doesn't seem interested in being balanced." A fleeting smile crossed Lysandra's face. "Lord Vashael has lived over 1,000 years. Change does not come easily to the ancient ones." She gestured toward a sweeping staircase. "Come, we have much to do before dinner." As Giselle followed her guide deeper into the estate, she couldn't help wondering what fate could possibly see in her that would complement the ancient Fae Lord. She was nothing, a tavern maid from a forgettable village, with no special talents or beauty. Yet the mark on her palm pulsed steadily, a constant reminder that something beyond her understanding had tied her to Lord Vashael, whether either of them liked it or not. The chambers assigned to Giselle were larger than her family's entire home in Meadowvale. The main room featured floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed a spectacular view of mountains, their peaks covered in mist. A massive four-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in blue silk that matched the plush carpet. "The bathing chamber is through there," Lysandra said, pointing to an arched doorway. "And the dressing room beyond. Your clothes have already been prepared." "How could you possibly have prepared clothes?" Giselle asked, bewildered. "You didn't even know I was coming." Lysandra's lips curved into a smile. "Lord Vashael had many gowns prepared centuries ago, just in case his fated mate did one day appear." Before Giselle could process this disturbing information, Lysandra was guiding her toward the bathing chamber. "A hot bath has been drawn. I'll help you prepare for dinner." The bathing chamber turned out to be a room centered around a pool large enough to swim in, with steaming water that smelled of unfamiliar flowers. "I can bathe myself," Giselle protested as Lysandra began unfastening her simple dress. "Not to our standards. Lord Vashael's senses are far keener than yours. Trust me, this is necessary." Giselle was too exhausted to argue. She surrendered to the Fae woman's hands. Lysandra at least allowed Giselle to wash herself, pressing various oils and soaps into the human woman's hands. Giselle was then guided to the dressing room, where Lysandra presented her with a gown of deepest emerald, the fabric so fine it seemed to flow like water through her fingers. "This will complement your coloring," Lysandra said, "and match your eyes." When she was finally allowed to look in a mirror, Giselle barely recognized herself. The plain tavern maid had been transformed into someone else entirely. Someone whose thick chestnut hair cascaded in glossy waves, whose green eyes seemed larger and brighter, whose skin glowed with health and youth. "There," Lysandra said with satisfaction. "Now you look worthy of the sacred bond." A bell tolled somewhere in the depths of the castle. "It's time." Lysandra adjusted a final fold in Giselle's gown. "He's waiting for you." The dining hall matched the grandeur of the entrance. Black marble walls rose to a ceiling adorned with constellations Giselle had never seen, stars that shifted and moved as she watched. A long table of polished obsidian dominated the room, set with dishes of silver and crystal. Lord Vashael stood at the head of the table, his massive frame silhouetted against a roaring hearth. He had changed from his traveling clothes into formal attire, a high-collared jacket of midnight blue that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His platinum hair had been pulled back from his face, secured at the nape of his neck with a silver clasp. Giselle's breath caught in her throat. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things were, a storm on the horizon, a predator at rest. His black eyes widened as they swept over her, lingering for a heartbeat too long before his expression settled back into cool detachment. "You are punctual," his deep voice echoed in the vast chamber. Giselle wasn't sure if it was a compliment or observation. "Thank you for providing this." She gestured vaguely at her dress. "Your presentation reflects on my household," he replied dismissively. "Sit." With a wave of his hand, a chair slid back at the opposite end of the table. The moment she settled into the chair, she felt it, a subtle shift in the air between them, a tightening of the invisible thread that connected them. Lord Vashael's jaw tightened, the only indication he felt it too. He took his own seat with fluid grace, his movements precise and controlled. Servants, or what Giselle assumed were servants, though their ethereal beauty rivaled Lysandra's, appeared silently from alcoves, bearing platters of food unlike anything Giselle had ever seen. Fruits that glowed, meats garnished with flowers, and wines that changed color as they were poured. Giselle hesitantly took a small bite of what appeared to be meat. Flavor exploded across her tongue, rich complex tastes that seemed to shift with each chew. She closed her eyes, momentarily lost in the sensation. When she opened them, she found Lord Vashael watching her with an intensity that sent warmth flooding her cheeks. "You enjoy our food," he said. "It's incredible." Giselle took another bite. If only the rest of her family were there to taste it. They ate in silence for several minutes. Giselle found herself studying him silently. The precise way he held his knife, the occasional twitch of his jaw, the strange stillness that surrounded him. "You have questions," he said finally, setting down his goblet. "Ask them." Giselle put down her fork. "Why did the bond connect us?" "I have asked myself the same question," he replied, his tone dry. "The bond does not explain itself. It simply is." "Then what will happen to us now?" Lord Vashael studied her for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "The bond creates certain imperatives. Physical proximity is required, especially in the early stages. Prolonged separation results in pain, eventually becoming unbearable. So, that's why you brought me here?" "Yes." His eyes darkened further, becoming endless pits that swallowed light. "And because the bond seeks to complete itself, it will draw us together, with increasing force, until that happens." "And how does it complete?" Giselle asked. "When two who are bound choose each other fully," he said, "not merely in proximity, but in trust. It is old magic. It does not recognize the careful distances we keep from one another. It wants what it wants." Giselle's mouth went dry. The thought of being so wholly tied to this ancient, powerful being sent a confusing mix of unease and something she didn't care to name coursing through her. "And if we keep our distance?" she managed to ask. "It grows harder," he admitted, his fingers tightening around his goblet. "The pull becomes pain. For both of us. The bond will not be ignored forever." "That's barbaric," Giselle whispered. "To be tied to someone whether you will it or not." "It is ancient," he corrected. "From a time before my kind set such store by choice." He paused, and his voice lowered. "But the choosing, when it comes, will be yours. I will not take what is not freely given." He rose abruptly, moving to stand before the hearth, his back to her. In the firelight, his broad shoulders cast long shadows across the floor. "So we're stuck with each other," she said. "Forever?" "Yes." His gaze dropped to the mark on her palm, then rose to meet her eyes. "Though your forever is significantly shorter than mine." A chill ran through her at the reminder of their differing lifespans. "I'll grow old and die, while you remain unchanged." "Yes." Lord Vashael shook his head. "It is too soon to discuss such matters. You should rest. It has been a long day." He moved toward her, extending his hand. "I will escort you back to your chambers." Giselle hesitated before placing her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the mark flared with a gentle warmth that raced up her arm. Lord Vashael's fingers tightened, his breath catching slightly. The walk back to her chambers passed in tense silence. Each step seemed to increase the pull between them, an invisible force drawing them closer despite their mutual reluctance. At her door, Lord Vashael released her hand with obvious effort, stepping back to put distance between them. The sudden absence of his touch left Giselle feeling strange. "Rest well," he said stiffly. "Lysandra will attend you soon." He turned to leave, then paused, his broad back still facing her. "The bond will grow more insistent tonight. If it becomes too much, you may send for me." Before Giselle could respond, he was gone, moving with that unnatural speed that reminded her he was not human. Giselle woke in the dark, her heart racing, her skin warm with a fever that had nothing to do with any illness. The mark on her palm glowed a soft crimson, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. With every pulse she felt it, the bond, no longer a distant hum but an insistent pull, as though an invisible thread had been drawn taut between her and the Fae Lord somewhere across the castle. It was not quite pain. It was closer to longing, sharp and bewildering, an ache to be near him that she had no name for and no defense against. She pressed her face into the pillow, determined to endure it. She would not send for him. She would not let ancient magic decide things for her. Not tonight. But the minutes stretched on, and the pull only grew stronger. The quiet of the room pressed in on her. The thread between them drew tighter and tighter, until being near him was all she could think of, until lying still took everything she had. Just when she thought she could bear it no longer, a soft knock came at the door. "Enter," she breathed. Lord Vashael stepped inside, and she understood at once that he felt it too. His composure, usually flawless, had frayed at the edges, his platinum hair loose, his jaw tight, his breathing not quite steady. The bond strained between them the moment their eyes met, and for once he made no effort to hide its effect on him. "You did not send for me," he said, his deep voice rougher than usual. "I thought I could manage on my own." Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile. "Foolish," he murmured, though there was no cruelty in it. He stayed by the door, keeping the width of the room between them, and she could see what the distance cost him. "I will go, if that is what you want," he said quietly. "The bond can be endured a while longer. The choice is yours, Giselle. It has always been yours." It was the first time he had said her name. The bond surged at the sound of it, and beneath its insistence she found something simpler, something entirely her own. She did not want him to go. "Stay," she said. "Please." For a long moment he did not move. Then, with a sound that was half sigh, half surrender, he crossed the room to her, and the careful, thousand-year distance he kept from the world finally fell away. He knelt at the edge of the bed, close but not touching, and raised his marked palm between them. "If you would have the bond quiet," he said softly, "then give me your hand. Nothing more than that. The rest is yours to refuse." Giselle lifted her hand and pressed her palm to his. The moment the two marks met, crimson light bloomed across the chamber. She felt the bond surge, not as fever now, but as something vast opening between them, a door swinging wide. Warmth poured up her arm and settled in her chest, and with it came him. Fragments of a mind 1,000 years deep, frozen forests where trees of crystalline ice sang in voices like silver bells, centuries of silence, a loneliness so old it had forgotten its own name. And he, she realized, could feel her in return. The bright, brief flame of a mortal life, fierce and unafraid even now. For a long moment they simply stayed there, palms joined, the light pulsing between them in time with two hearts learning the same rhythm. Whatever iron control he had held for 1,000 years loosened its grip, and for the first time she saw the being beneath the ice, not a lord, not a legend, but something startlingly alive, and startlingly hers. When the light at last ebbed to a soft, steady glow, the fever was gone, washed clean, leaving only a warmth between them that felt less like magic and more like the beginning of something neither had a name for. The bond hummed between them. No longer a desperate fever, but a warm, steady presence. Lord Vashael settled onto the edge of the bed beside her, and after a moment's hesitation, let one arm come to rest lightly at her back. "You are unexpected. In what way?" Giselle asked, her voice still unsteady. "In every way," he replied, his gaze traveling over her flushed face, her tousled hair. A smile tugged at her lips. "Is that a compliment?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "Yes." They sat in comfortable silence, their breathing gradually slowing to normal, but the marks on their palms still glowed faintly. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Giselle's last thought was that while she had not chosen this path, perhaps there was a way forward. Lord Vashael was cold and distant, damaged by centuries of solitude. But in those brief moments when his control had loosened, she had glimpsed something else beneath the ancient ice. Something that might, with time and patience, remember how to feel love once more. Chapter 2. The castle was a study in beautiful abandonment. There were signs of past grandeur and life everywhere. Great halls built for hosting hundreds stood empty and silent, dust dancing in the beams of sunlight that poured through stained glass windows. Ballrooms with elaborate tiled floors stretched vacant, their mirrors reflecting only emptiness where dancers once whirled. "It's so empty," Giselle said as Lysandra led her through yet another magnificent chamber, this one lined with musical instruments draped in protective cloths. "Was it always like this?" Lysandra's silver eyes held a hint of sadness. "No. This was once the most vibrant court in all the realms. Lord Vashael was renowned for his hospitality, for the feasts and festivals that drew visitors from across the mortal and Fae worlds. What happened? Giselle ran her fingers along a harp whose strings had been loosened. Time, Lysandra sighed, and perhaps, weariness. A millennium is a long while to play host, even for one of our kind. As they continued through the castle, Giselle noticed that many rooms, though clearly unused for years, had been meticulously preserved. Nothing was allowed to decay or fall into true ruin. It was like the castle waited, suspended in time, for guests who would never return. There used to be humans here? She asked, noticing portraits in one gallery that depicted mortals alongside Fae nobility, all dressed in the styles of many different eras. Yes, Lysandra nodded. Lord Vashael's court was unique in its diversity. Fae lords and ladies, human artists and scholars, even creatures of myth and legend all gathered under his protection. It was said that here, all were equal in his sight. And now? Now there are only memories. Lysandra's voice was tinged with something like regret. Some 300 years ago, Lord Vashael disbanded his court. The Fae returned to their own realms, the humans to their villages, the mythical creatures to their hidden places. Only a skeleton staff remains to maintain the castle. Giselle tried to imagine Vashael, cold remote Vashael, presiding over a court of diverse beings, hosting feasts and balls, encouraging art and music and scholarship. The image seemed utterly at odds with the detached lord who had slipped away that morning without a backward glance. Is he lonely? I do not think Lord Vashael would frame his existence in such terms. That's not an answer. No, Lysandra agreed with a hint of a smile. It is not. Lord Vashael's inner life is his own. If he wishes to share it with you, he will do so in his own time. Giselle crossed to one of the tall windows that overlooked the castle grounds. From this vantage point, she could see formal gardens, the colorful flower beds still maintained to perfection despite the absence of guests, and beyond them, the deep forest that surrounded the castle. In the distance, a pale figure moved through the trees. Vashael, his platinum hair unmistakable even at this distance. He walked alone. Even from afar, he seemed isolated, a solitary figure in a vast landscape. Does he ever smile? Giselle asked softly, more to herself than to Lysandra. He did once. Often. In fact, the court jester once claimed that Lord Vashael's laugh could make flowers bloom out of season. Giselle suppressed a giggle. I can't imagine it. Many things become difficult to imagine after centuries of absence, Lysandra sighed. The kitchens will prepare lunch shortly. Would you prefer to dine in the small solarium? It has a pleasant view of the rose garden. Giselle nodded, reluctantly turning away from the window. Vashael had disappeared into the deeper forest, lost from her sight. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the solarium. The walls were adorned with intricate paintings depicting scenes of ancient parties, crystal chandeliers suspended by chains so fine they appeared to float. Giselle sat alone at a table built to seat 20, feeling impossibly small amid such opulence. She couldn't help but think about how the room must have overflowed with light and laughter, the air filled with music and conversation. Now there was only silence, broken occasionally by the whisper of a servant's footsteps as dishes were quietly brought and removed. The food, at least, was extraordinary. Each course arrived under silver covers that, when lifted, released aromas so complex and enticing that Giselle found herself closing her eyes to better appreciate them. Delicacies she couldn't name melted on her tongue, flavors shifting and evolving with each bite. Is everything to your satisfaction, my lady? Lysandra asked, silently appearing beside the table. It's incredible. Giselle gestured at her plate where a pastry glowed a soft blue. Though I'm not entirely sure what I'm eating. Starfruit tart with moon honey, Lysandra replied. A specialty of our kitchens. Giselle took another bite, savoring the sweetness that somehow reminded her of childhood summers. The food at home was never like this. My father did his best, but it was mostly bland. The mention of her family sent a pang through her chest. Not even 2 days had passed since she'd been taken from Meadowvale, yet it felt like a lifetime ago. What were they doing now? Had Vashael kept his promise to care for them? Were the healers attending to her father's weakened lungs? Did her siblings understand why she had gone? Is something amiss with the food? Lysandra asked. No. I was just. Giselle set down her fork. I was thinking of my family. That's all. Lysandra's expression softened slightly, but the massive doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Lysandra immediately straightened, gracefully bowing her head. Vashael stood in the doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunlit corridor beyond. The sight of him stole Giselle's breath away. The moment her eyes found him, the bond surged to life between them, a wave that swept away every rational thought, leaving only the pull toward him. Across the hall, Vashael went still, his nostrils flaring, and she knew the same pull had taken him. There was no fighting it, and after the night before, no part of her wanted to. He crossed the room to her in long strides. The forgotten meal, the lonely hall, the 1,000 years of distance he wore like armor, All of it fell away as he reached for her hands and pressed his marked palm to hers. The crimson light answered at once, flooding the solarium, far brighter and fiercer than the night before. The bond poured through the contact and threw them both wide open, and for a few breathless heartbeats Giselle was lost in it, the vast, cold age of him, the silver bell song of frozen forests, and beneath it that ancient, nameless loneliness, all of it crashing into her at once. She felt her own mortal warmth flood back into him in answer, and the two of them simply held on while the magic burned itself bright and then, slowly, quiet. The crimson light gradually faded to a soft glow that pulsed in time with their slowing heartbeats. For several long moments, neither moved. Vashael steadied her with both hands, his breathing ragged, his composed mask slow to return. A goblet had toppled unnoticed at the table's edge, wine spreading dark across the white cloth. Giselle's knees trembled with the aftermath, and she gripped the front of his shirt to stay upright, shaken by how completely the bond had taken them both in the open hall. Vashael seemed to sense her unsteadiness. Without a word, he shrugged out of his formal jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The garment was large on her smaller frame, but its weight was steadying, and it carried the cool scent of him. "I did not intend," he began, then paused, searching for words. "The bond's pull was stronger than I anticipated." "For me too," Giselle said softly. They regarded each other in awkward silence, the enormity of what had passed between them hanging in the air. Finally, Vashael offered his arm, steadying her with surprising gentleness until the last of the tremor left her legs. "You should rest," he said, putting distance between them. "I will have Lysandra bring you something fresh to wear." Giselle nodded, too overwhelmed to form a coherent response. The bond had receded again, satisfied for now, leaving her feeling calm and content. "The bond grows stronger," Vashael said. His voice was calm but she could see unease in his gaze. "Not weaker as I expected. Is that bad?" Giselle asked, clutching his jacket more tightly around her shoulders. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, with a slight incline of his head that might have been resignation or acceptance, "It simply is. We are bound together by forces beyond our understanding or control." He turned to leave, then paused. "You may join me for dinner later, if you wish." Without waiting for a response, he left the room and disappeared down the corridor, his tall figure soon swallowed by shadow and distance. Giselle sighed, fastening the buttons of Vashael's jacket. It smelled of him, like winter pines and ancient stone, cool and somehow timeless. She found herself burying her face in the fabric, inhaling deeply. The mark on her palm pulsed gently. Giselle traced the crimson pattern with her fingertip, following the intricate whorls that bound her to Vashael for the rest of her life, however long or short that might be compared to his eternity. Long or short, she decided, it would not be spent in fear or passive acceptance. If fate had bound her to this ancient, powerful lord, then she would embrace that fate fully. She would learn his secrets, understand his past, perhaps even help heal whatever wounds had driven him to cold solitude. The bond had bound them together. Now Giselle silently vowed to claim something more: his trust, his confidence, perhaps even, eventually, his heart. Chapter 3. Days passed in the castle with a strange, dreamlike quality, but Giselle found herself settling into a routine. Her mornings began in Vashael's arms, his massive form curled around her in the pre-dawn darkness. She often woke to find him in a state of deep stillness, his breathing slow and even, his usually guarded face relaxed. In these rare moments, Giselle would study him, the perfect planes of his face, the platinum hair spread across the pillow, the ancient scars that mapped his pale chest. He looked younger somehow, less burdened by the weight of his existence. But the moment never lasted. As if sensing her gaze, his dark eyes would open, instantly alert, the walls snapping back into place behind them. "The bond is quiet," he would say, his tone neutral as he disentangled himself from her and rose from the bed. He never lingered in the mornings. By the time Lysandra arrived with breakfast, Vashael would be long gone, attending to the mysterious duties that occupied his days. Giselle had asked once what these duties entailed, but his answer had been vague, something about maintaining the boundaries between realms and stabilizing magical energies, concepts beyond her human understanding. After breakfast, Giselle was left to her own devices. The first few days, she had remained close to her chambers, intimidated by the vastness of the castle and fear of becoming lost in its endless corridors. But as the days passed, her natural curiosity overcame her caution. The castle seemed to welcome her exploration, revealing new wonders with each passing day. Libraries filled with books in languages she couldn't read, conservatories where strange plants grew in geometric patterns, some humming gentle melodies when she passed too close. Art galleries containing portraits of beings both beautiful and terrible, their eyes seeming to follow her movements. "Does he paint?" Giselle asked, trying to imagine Vashael's large powerful hands putting color onto those canvases. "He did," Lysandra replied, her tone suggesting the subject was closed. Always the past tense, Giselle noted. He was, he did, he had been. As if the vassal who had hosted courts and played music was a different being from the cold remote lord who lay beside her each night. The afternoons were spent exploring the castle grounds. Gardens stretched in every direction, some formally arranged, others wild and untamed. Paths wound through ancient forests where the trees whispered secrets just beyond the edge of hearing. Streams flowed uphill in defiance of natural law, their waters gleaming with colors not found in the human realm. Giselle had discovered a particular spot she favored, a small clearing by a pond where rainbow-scaled creatures that were neither fish nor bird swam and flew in lazy circles. A bench of polished stone sat beneath a weeping willow whose silver leaves chimed gently in the breeze. Here, she would sit for hours, watching the strange beauty of this otherworldly place and wondering what her family was doing in the distant human village of Meadowvale. It was during one such afternoon that she felt it again, the familiar tingling that began in her palm and quickly spread throughout her body, the bond awakening, calling to its mate. She didn't need to look up to know Vashael was approaching. His presence was a physical thing she could feel, a pressure in the air, a cooling of the temperature, a sudden awareness of being watched by something ancient and powerful. "You favor this spot," he said. He was dressed simply, black trousers and a flowing white shirt open at the throat. His platinum hair hung loose around his shoulders, stirring slightly in the gentle breeze. "It's peaceful," she replied, feeling the pull building within her. "The fishbirds are beautiful, skyfin," he corrected, moving toward her with that predatory grace. "They are neither fish nor bird, but something else entirely. Like you," Giselle said without thinking. "Neither human nor animal, but something else entirely." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or amusement. It was gone too quickly to identify. "Indeed," he agreed, closing the distance between them. "Like me," he stood before her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural coolness emanating from his skin. The mark on her palm pulsed in time with her quickening heartbeat, responding to his proximity. The crimson light spilled between her fingers, casting ruby reflections on the stone bench. "The bond calls," he said, his voice rougher than usual, betraying the effect of their connection despite his controlled expression. "Yes," Giselle whispered, already reaching for him. The moment her marked palm met his, the bond flared between them with startling intensity, brighter here in the open air than it had ever been within the castle walls. Vashael's reaction was immediate, his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black, his breath catching. He drew her up from the bench and folded her hands in his, both their marked palms pressed together between them. The garden, the open sky, the bright skyfin scattering across the pond, none of it mattered. There was only the cool strength of him and the crimson light kindling between their joined hands. It rushed through her all at once, the way it had by candlelight and across the lunch table, but stronger now, wilder, as though the open sky had given it room to grow. The vast cold age of him poured into her, and her brief mortal warmth into him, until for a long moment there was nothing but the two of them and the light blazing in the dappled shade beneath the willow. The crimson light flared to blinding intensity, then gradually faded to a soft glow that pulsed in time with their slowing heartbeats. For several long moments, neither moved. Vashael stood with his forehead resting against hers, his breathing gradually returning to normal, his composure slow to gather itself again. When at last he straightened, Giselle's legs trembled beneath her, and he steadied her with surprising gentleness, his large hands cupping her elbows until she found her balance. She became aware, then, of how thoroughly the bond had undone her, her hair fallen loose, her gown rumpled and grass-stained, a faint chill left in its wake where his cool magic had washed through her. Without a word, Vashael drew off his white shirt and settled it around her shoulders. It was far too large on her, but it was warm from him, and she pulled it close. "Thank you," she murmured. An awkward silence fell between them. The bond had receded again, its pull eased for now, leaving them in that strange space between intimacy and distance that seemed to define their relationship. "Will you dine with me tonight?" Giselle asked, breaking their usual pattern of silence. Vashael paused, his expression revealing nothing. "I have matters to attend to." "You had matters to attend to every day this week." Giselle couldn't hide the frustration from her voice. "Yet you manage to find me whenever the bond calls." His eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication her words had any effect. "The bond cannot be denied. Other things can. So I am merely an obligation to be fulfilled?" she asked, hating the hurt that crept into her tone. Vashael regarded her silently for a long moment, his ancient eyes unreadable. "You are more than that. But what you ask for, companionship, conversation, I'm finding these things difficult." "Why?" Giselle pressed, sensing a rare moment of openness. "What is so difficult about spending time with the person you are bound to?" His expression hardened. "The bond binds us. It does not require me to entertain you." The words stung. But Giselle refused to show it. No, it doesn't require it, but common courtesy might. Something that might almost have been surprise flickered in his eyes. Phew, she imagined, spoke to the ancient Fae Lord with such directness. Perhaps another time, he said after a pause that stretched uncomfortably long. With that inadequate response, he turned and strode away, his tall figure soon lost among the trees. Giselle remained by the pond. The skyfin had returned, their rainbow scales catching the light as they swam in lazy circles, oblivious to her distress. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter, that she hadn't expected more from this strange arrangement thrust upon them by ancient magic. Yet the coldness of his rejection left an ache in her chest that refused to subside. With a sigh, Giselle turned away from the pond and began walking aimlessly through the gardens. She didn't want to return to her chambers yet. There, Lysandra would fuss over her rumpled gown and disheveled appearance, would offer sympathetic glances that Giselle couldn't bear right now. Better to wander until she had composed herself. Paths of crushed silver stone wound through flowering shrubs that sang softly when the breeze touched them. Fountains shaped like fantastic creatures spilled water in defiance of gravity. In another mood, Giselle would have found it all wondrous. Now, the beauty only emphasized her isolation. She had been at the castle for 2 weeks, lying at Vassal's side each night, yet she knew almost nothing about him beyond what she could observe for herself or glean from Lysandra's carefully measured revelations. What did he think about when he wasn't with her? What brought him joy, or sorrow? Did he resent her presence, this human woman thrust upon him by the sacred bond? Was she merely an inconvenience, a duty to be fulfilled with minimal engagement? Giselle paused, lost in her thoughts, when a deep voice cut through her contemplation. "You there? Girl, why are you standing around daydreaming when there's work to be done?" She turned to find a Fae man striding toward her. He was tall, though not as tall as Vasal, with long black hair that fell in a glossy wave to his waist. His features were striking: high cheekbones, a strong jaw, full lips arranged in an impatient scowl. Unlike Vasal's dark eyes, his were a brilliant emerald green that seemed to glow with inner light. His clothing spoke of wealth and status: a black jacket embroidered with silver stars that actually twinkled, trousers of the same fabric tucked into gleaming black boots. Jewels glittered on his fingers. In one hand, he carried an ornate traveling bag made of what appeared to be scaled leather in shifting shades of green and gold. "Well?" He looked Giselle up and down with disdain. "Are you mute, girl? Where is Lord Vashael?" "I've come to see what he's been up to." Giselle blinked, taken aback by his tone. She should correct him, explain who she was, but something in her hesitated. What was she, really? Vasal's mate by ancient magic? Yes, but he had made it abundantly clear that she wasn't worth any more of his time. And dressed as she was in Vasal's oversized shirt, her hair in disarray from their encounter by the pond, she certainly didn't look like the lady of the castle. "I don't know, my lord," she said, dropping her gaze as she'd seen the servants do. "The castle is mostly empty these days." The Fae noble sighed dramatically. "Typical. Lord Vashael grows more reclusive with each century. Here, make yourself useful." He thrust the bag at her. "Hold this." The bag was surprisingly heavy, and its surface felt strange, not like leather at all, but almost alive, the scales shifting beneath her fingers. "The blue sitting room should still be sufficient," the Fae continued, walking toward the castle. "I need to rest my feet and have a drink." Giselle followed silently, the bag awkward in her arms. The Fae strode ahead with the confidence of one familiar with his surroundings, though he occasionally paused at intersections as if refreshing his memory. "Ah, here we are," he said as they reached a set of double doors carved with intricate patterns of waves and seabirds. "The blue sitting room. Still as dreary as I remember, no doubt." He pushed the doors open without knocking and swept inside, Giselle trailing behind him. The room was pleasant enough: comfortable chairs in various shades of blue, polished wood tables, and tall windows that overlooked the gardens. "Set that down anywhere." The Fae Lord collapsed into a chair. "Then fetch me some wine. The Elder Blossom vintage. Nothing else is worth drinking in this backwater." Giselle carefully placed the bag on a chair, glancing around the room. There was a cabinet against one wall that might contain bottles, but, well, the Fae said impatiently. "Are you simple? The wine, girl." "Now, I'm sorry, my lord," Giselle stammered, her cheeks heating with embarrassment. "I don't know where the wine is kept." He rolled his eyes, incompetent as well as slow. "The cabinet to your left, third shelf. Even a simple human should be capable of locating a bottle." Giselle moved to the cabinet, opening it with trembling fingers. Inside were indeed several bottles, their labels written in flowing script she couldn't read. Just as her panic was mounting, the sitting room door opened. Giselle turned, relief washing through her at the sight of Vasal filling the doorway. "Lazarus," Vasal said, his deep voice betraying no emotion. "An unexpected visit, Lord Vasal." Lazarus rose and executed a bow that somehow managed to be both correct and slightly mocking. It has been too long. The others grow curious about your continued retirement. I'm sure they do, Vashael replied dryly, moving into the room. His dark eyes swept over Giselle briefly, taking in her obvious discomfort, but his expression revealed nothing. Your servant seems unable to locate a simple bottle of wine. Lazarus gestured to her with a dismissive wave. Standards have fallen even further than I'd heard. To Giselle's utter bewilderment, Vashael merely nodded. The human staff is new. Girl, the elder blossom is in the silver-topped decanter. Pour Lord Lazarus a glass. Giselle froze like he'd slapped her in the face. For a moment, she considered revealing the truth, declaring herself as Vashael's mate, but what would be the point? The hollowness in her chest expanded, swallowing her anger, her pride, her hurt. If Vashael himself saw no reason to acknowledge her, why should she make a scene? Yes, my lord, she murmured, turning back to the cabinet and locating the silver-topped decanter. Her hands shook slightly as she poured the pale golden liquid into a crystal glass. She brought the glass to Lazarus. He took it without acknowledgement, already engaged in conversation with Vashael. The Eastern Fae Court sends its regards, Lazarus was saying, his melodious voice dripping with disdain. There is much speculation about your continued absence. Some even suggest you might be unwell. My health is excellent, as you can see, Vashael replied, his tone neutral. The court's concern is noted, if unnecessary, and yet you remain here, isolated in this ancient pile of stone. No visitors, no entertainment, no companionship. His emerald eyes flicked briefly to Giselle, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Beyond the occasional human servant, of course, Vashael's expression remained impassive. I find solitude conducive to my studies. Studies? For 3 centuries. The court grows restless, Vashael. Your talents are wasted here. My talents are my own to waste as I see fit. Giselle stood awkwardly to one side, unsure if she should leave or remain. The conversation continued. A verbal chess match of innuendo and veiled questions from Lazarus, met with measured, non-committal responses from Vashael. After several minutes, Vashael finally seemed to remember her presence. Girl, he said, not looking at her, Lord Lazarus will be staying the night. Prepare the aqua suite in the east wing. Giselle had no idea where this aqua room might be or what preparing it would entail, but she nodded obediently. Yes, my lord, and find something more appropriate to wear, Vashael added, his tone cool. Your current attire is unsuitable for service. Heat flooded Giselle's face, both embarrassment and anger finally penetrating her numb resignation. Yes, my lord, she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she backed toward the door. Excuse me for a moment, Vashael said to his guest. She's new. Without waiting for a response, he strode to the door, gesturing for her to precede him into the corridor. Once outside, with the sitting room door firmly closed behind them, Vashael's demeanor changed subtly. The coldness remained, but there was a new tension in his massive frame. Follow me, he said quietly, leading her several paces down the hall, out of earshot of the sitting room. Giselle kept her eyes fixed on the floor, the hurt and confusion swirling within her like a storm gathering strength. Lazarus must not know who you are, Vashael said. He is here to gather information to feed back to the other Fae. If they learn of the bond, of your existence, it would be embarrassing for you, Giselle finished for him, unable to keep the bitterness from her tone. The great Lord Vashael, bonded to a human tavern maid, it would be dangerous for you, he snapped. The Fae courts are not kind to humans who rise above their station. You would become a target, a point of leverage against me. So I am to play servant while he's here? Hide away like some shameful secret? Yes. For your protection, my protection. How considerate of you. Something flickered in Vashael's expression, irritation perhaps, or impatience. Lazarus will remain for a day or two at most. Once he is gone, things will return to normal. Normal. The word almost made her laugh. What was normal about any of this? As you wish, my lord, she sighed, the fight draining out of her. What was the point of resisting? This was her life now. Strange and isolated and empty beyond the strange communion the bond demanded. Good. Vashael glanced back toward the sitting room door. Stay in your room for the next few days and leave it as little as possible. I must return to Lazarus before he begins exploring on his own. As Vashael turned to leave, it happened. The familiar tingling began in Giselle's palm, quickly spreading up her arm and through her body like wildfire. Vashael froze. No, he hissed. Not now. The bond fever was rising faster than ever before, perhaps intensified by their argument, by the emotions churning between them. Giselle's knees weakened. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to remain upright as the bond's pull flooded through her. Vashael, she gasped. I can't. He was at her side in an instant, one massive hand covering her mouth, the other clasping her marked palm. The contact sent a jolt through her so intense that she nearly cried out against his fingers. Quiet, he whispered. Lazarus must not hear. Giselle nodded weakly, understanding the danger even through the haze fogging her mind. He shoved open a door beside them, revealing a small storage room filled with sheets and blankets. The moment the door closed behind them, the crimson light was already spilling bright from their marked palms, far too bright to risk in the open corridor. The closet was tiny, barely room for the two of them among the shelves of linen, and in the cramped dark Vashael took both her hands and pressed his marked palm hard to hers. There was no time for the slow, careful way the bond usually took them. It came fast and fierce and silent, the two of them holding utterly still and muffling every sound, mindful of the guests somewhere in the halls beyond. Through the contact she could feel his emotions tangled with her own. Need, yes, but something more conflicted beneath it, something he would never say aloud. The crimson light swelled between their joined hands and finally guttered low, leaving them pressed close together in the dark, breathing hard. Vashael eased back from her, his movements gentle despite his haste, his expression already returning to its usual impassivity. I must return to Lazarus. Vashael straightened his jacket. He will grow suspicious if I'm absent too long. Giselle nodded, still leaning against the door for support, her legs not quite steady yet. What should I do? Go to your chambers. Stay there. I'll send Lysandra to you with fresh clothing. He reached for the door handle, then paused. This is not how I would have things between us, he said quietly. If circumstances were different. He didn't finish the thought. With a final glance at her, he opened the door a crack, checked the corridor, then slipped out, closing it softly behind him. Giselle remained in the closet for several minutes, waiting for her breathing to steady, for her legs to stop trembling. She gathered herself enough to peek out into the corridor. Finding it empty, she hurried toward her chambers, clutching the oversized shirt around her, praying she wouldn't encounter Lazarus or any of the castle's servants. Was this to be her existence for the rest of her days? A secret shame? A duty the bond demanded? Never fully acknowledged? Never truly known? She moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens where she and Vashael had been swept together beneath the silver willow. How quickly everything had changed, from quiet closeness to public denial, from mate to servant in the space of a single afternoon. Chapter 4. The leather glove was uncomfortable in the warm kitchen, but Giselle wore it nonetheless, not to hide her mark from the servants, but as a precaution against Lord Lazarus's unexpected appearances. You needn't scrub so vigorously, my lady, said Morel, a willowy fae with skin the pale blue of a winter sky. Her silver eyes held a mixture of amusement and concern as she watched Giselle attack the stone floor with a worn rag. We have enchantments that could clean this in moments, I know, Giselle replied, sitting back on her heels to wipe sweat from her brow, but I need something to do with my hands. And please, just call me Giselle. Morel's lips twitched. As you wish, Giselle. Though it feels improper to address Lord Vashael's bonded mate so informally, 2 days had passed since Lord Lazarus's arrival, and the isolation of hiding in her chambers had quickly become unbearable. After the first day spent pacing her rooms like a caged animal, Giselle had sought out the castle's Fae servants, who had welcomed her with a reverence that still made her uncomfortable. To her surprise, working alongside them had been pleasant. Unlike Vashael, who shared nothing of himself beyond what the bond demanded, the servants spoke freely of the castle's history, of the days when the halls had been filled with music and laughter. We're all glad that you've come, Farron said. His pale yellow eyes glowed like candlelight. We had feared Lord Vashael would spend eternity alone. He's not exactly embracing companionship, Giselle had replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her tone. He only brought me here because his glowing hand made him. The servants exchanged knowing glances at that, their ageless faces showing a patience that only immortal beings could master. The sacred bond does not make mistakes, Tulith, the head cook, said firmly. If it chose you for our Lord, there is purpose in it, whether he acknowledges that purpose yet or not. Giselle sighed. No matter which Fae she talked to about the bond, it was always the same answer. You're thinking of him, Morel said, a smile playing on her lips. Your aura shifts color when you do, from green to a rather lovely shade of crimson. Heat rose to Giselle's cheeks. Can all Fae see auras? Only the older ones, Morel replied, passing Giselle a fresh bucket of fragrant water, and only those with certain gifts. I was a seer in the court days, before, she trailed off, something like sorrow flickering across her delicate features. Before what? Giselle prompted, eager for any insight into Vashael's mysterious past. Morel hesitated, silver eyes darting to the other servants working nearby. They had all gone suspiciously quiet. It is not our place to speak of the Lord's history, Farron said, though regret tinged his musical voice. He will share what he wishes, when he wishes, which is nothing, ever, Giselle muttered, attacking the floor with renewed vigor. A ripple of something? Amusement? Sympathy? Passed through the servants. They all served Vashael with unquestioning loyalty, yet they seemed to understand Giselle's frustration with their master. Then Giselle felt it, the telltale tingling that began in her palm, spreading rapidly up her arm and through her body. The bond, awakening again, its timing as inconvenient as ever. The Fae servants noticed immediately, their silver eyes widening as they sensed the magic activating. Crimson light spilled from beneath Giselle's glove, casting ruby reflections on the wet stone floor. "The bond calls," Tulith said, already ushering the other servants toward the kitchen exits. "We will grant you privacy, my lady." "Wait," Giselle protested, struggling to her feet as the bond's pull built within her, making her limbs feel heavy. "There's no need for." But the servants were already gone, disappearing with Fae speed that still startled her after weeks in the castle. The kitchen door closed behind the last of them just as the temperature in the room dropped, the only warning before Vashael slipped inside. "This is becoming problematic," he said, voice low. "Lazarus grows more curious by the hour." "I didn't exactly plan this," Giselle retorted, even as her body leaned toward his, drawn by the invisible thread that connected them. Vashael's gaze swept over her, taking in the simple servant's dress stained with soap and water, the leather glove, the wisps of hair escaping from her bun. "You've been working with the kitchen staff." Displeasure was evident in his tone. "I instructed you to remain in your chambers." "I was going mad with boredom," Giselle replied, unapologetic despite the heat rising to her cheeks, heat that had little to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the bond's growing demands. "And your servants have been kinder to me than you have." A retort seemed to form on Vashael's lips, but the bond flared between them. His pupils dilated, and the cool press of his hand found hers. "We have little time," he said, his voice low and rough. "Lazarus busies himself with correspondence, but he will notice my absence soon." He bent and kissed her once, briefly, and then there was no room left for anything but the bond. He laced his marked hand through hers and pressed their palms together, and the crimson light leapt up between them, bright enough to throw their shadows against the kitchen walls. What followed was hurried and breathless, the two of them straining to stay silent in the cavernous kitchen with Lazarus somewhere in the castle beyond. There was no patience in it, only the relentless pull of the bond and the cool strength of his hands around hers, holding her steady as it swept through them both. And then, somewhere in the midst of it, something shifted. The mask of cool distance dissolved from his face completely, the ancient control he wore like armor falling away until there was nothing left but the being beneath, open and unguarded in a way she had never seen. The bond blazed crimson between their joined hands and slowly, finally, burned itself quiet. When clarity returned, she found herself gathered against his chest, leaning back against the edge of the great table, held in his arms. His heartbeat pulsed beneath her ear, steady and strong, and the last of the crimson light was fading from the air around them. They stayed together until their heartbeats slowed to matching rhythms and the glow of their marks faded to a gentle pulse. When at last he eased her upright, he held her with care until strength returned to her legs. "Your dress," he said, glancing at her disheveled appearance. She looked down to find her dress rumpled and her hair half fallen from its pins, the front of her bodice askew where she gripped the table's edge to stay upright. Heat rose to her cheeks when she realized how completely the bond had taken them, here in the castle's kitchen where the servants could still be just outside the door. He removed his formal jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The fine fabric carried his scent, winter pine and ancient power. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling it close around her. "You should not be here," he said. "The kitchens are too public, too close to where Lazarus takes his meals." "I can't stay locked in my room all day," Giselle replied, attempting to straighten her rumpled dress. "I need to do something, talk to someone." Something flickered in Vashael's expression, surprise, perhaps, or a realization that hadn't occurred to him before. "The servants are friendly to you," he said, the statement half question, half observation. "More than you," Giselle replied, unable to keep the hurt from her voice despite the lingering warmth of their encounter. "They treat me as a person, not an obligation." Vashael studied her face for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes, a glimpse of something warmer, more human. But before he could respond, the kitchen door swung open as the servants began to return to their duties. With a last, unreadable glance at her, Vashael slipped out of the room. Tulith paused in the doorway, her silver eyes taking in Giselle's flushed appearance and the faint crimson glow that still emanated from beneath her glove. A knowing smile touched the cook's lips. "The bond is strong between you," she said, moving to her place by the fire to continue preparing the meal. "Stronger than any I've witnessed in my 9 centuries." Farron nodded in agreement as he resumed his work at the herb table. "The sacred bond does not make mistakes," he said, "though sometimes its wisdom takes time to become apparent, even to those directly involved." Giselle smoothed her skirts, embarrassment catching up to her as she realized what she and Vashael must look like to these ancient beings, swept up by the bond right there in the kitchen, unable to wait long enough to find somewhere more private. But there was no judgment in the Fae servant's eyes, Only a patient understanding that made her wonder just how long some of them had served Vashael, how much of his 1,000-year existence they had witnessed. The peace that had momentarily settled over Giselle was shattered when Lazarus's short visit showed no signs of ending. Worse, couriers had been dispatched from the castle, carrying ornate invitations sealed with shimmering wax. "He's inviting others," Lysandra informed Giselle, her voice dripping with displeasure as she helped Giselle into the simple servant's dress that had become her daily attire. "Lord Vashael is displeased." "Displeased?" Giselle echoed, finding the word inadequate for the cold fury she had glimpsed in Vashael's face that morning. "He looked ready to throw Lazarus from the highest tower." "If only he would," Lysandra muttered, so softly that Giselle barely caught the words. "Lord Lazarus takes advantage of our Lord's legendary hospitality. No proper Fae would overstay their welcome like this." Giselle's heart sank. "How many are coming?" "6 that we know of. Minor nobility from the Eastern Court. Those who owe allegiance to Lazarus or seek his favor." Lysandra's delicate hands worked swiftly, arranging Giselle's hair into the severe style befitting a servant. "They arrive tonight." "Tonight? But it's more demanding at night," Giselle said, as the mark on her palm gave a warning throb, as if to remind her that nothing, not Lazarus, not a hall full of Fae nobility, would be allowed to keep her from Vashael when the bond called. "Yes," Lysandra sighed, her expression grave. "Lord Vashael is aware of the complication." "What am I to do?" Giselle asked, panic fluttering in her chest. "I can't hide in my chambers forever, and if the bond calls while all these Fae are present, Lord Vashael has a plan. He asks that you remain in the north wing, as far from the Great Hall as possible. He will find a way to slip away when the time comes. But plans," Giselle was learning, rarely survived contact with the unpredictable nature of the Fae. Chapter 5. The castle hummed with activity as servants prepared for the arrival of Lazarus's guests. Despite Vashael's reluctance to play host, his pride would not allow anything less than perfection. Dormant enchantments activated throughout the castle. Chandeliers that had hung dark for centuries blazed with ethereal light. Fountains that had stood silent flowed with waters that shifted through every color imaginable. Music played by invisible hands echoed through halls. Giselle watched from the shadows of a servant's passage as the first of the visitors arrived. Their procession was a spectacle of magic and arrogance, carriages pulled by creatures that were neither horse nor deer but something unearthly and beautiful, attendants whose skins sparkled like crushed diamonds in the fading sunlight, banners that moved as if alive, displaying house crests that shifted and changed with each passing breeze. "I doubt that they'll leave soon," whispered Farron as he appeared beside her. 600 years ago, the summer solstice ball lasted 7 days and nights, followed by 7 weeks of merriment. Her stomach sank, but before Giselle could ask more, the mark on her palm gave another warning pulse, stronger this time. The bond was awakening earlier than usual, perhaps responding to her anxiety. "I should go." She backed away. "Lord Vashael wants me in the north wing." Farron nodded, concern evident in his ageless face. "Be careful, my lady. You're the first human mate that we've seen in centuries, so there's no telling how they would react if they knew." The north wing was a forgotten remnant of the castle's former glory, but unlike the carefully preserved spaces Giselle had explored over the past weeks, these rooms showed signs of genuine neglect: furniture draped in dusty coverings, windows clouded with grime, floors that creaked beneath her feet. She paced the length of what might once have been a music room, running her fingers over the silent strings of a harp nearly as tall as she was. The bond was intensifying with each passing minute, the crimson mark on her palm pulsing in time with her accelerating heartbeat. Where was Vashael? The sun had set an hour ago. By now, he would surely have felt the bond's call as strongly as she did. Had the presence of his unwanted guests somehow interfered with their connection? The fever was building within her, starting deep in her chest and spreading outward until her skin felt too tight, too sensitive, until every quiet minute alone became its own kind of agony. It was worse than it had ever been, a need to be near him so total it eclipsed thought. "Vashael," she whispered, half plea, half prayer. As if summoned by her voice, the temperature in the room dropped and Vashael slipped through the door. His platinum hair hung loose around his shoulders, and he wore formal attire, a jacket of midnight blue embroidered with silver constellations, fitted trousers of the same hue, boots that gleamed in the dim light. "The bond comes earlier than expected," he said quietly, running a hand through his hair. "The guests are still arriving." "I can't help that," Giselle replied, already moving toward him, drawn by the invisible thread that connected them. Vashael's dark eyes reflected the crimson light spilling from her palm. "I know," he muttered, closing the distance between them with that predatory grace. He kissed her, and the last of his careful restraint fell away with it. There was nothing methodical about him now, nothing of the distant lord, only need, and a tenderness underneath it he would never have admitted to. This time he let her set the pace, surrendering a measure of his endless control into her hands. and she took it gladly. He folded her marked palm against his, and the world shrank to the crimson glow between them and the cool press of him. The bond building and building until it finally crested and broke and washed them both clean. For several precious moments, they remained close together. The bond temporarily eased. "I must return," he said finally, his deep voice resonating through his chest. Giselle nodded against him, disappointment flooding her despite knowing this moment couldn't last. It was always the same, a brief connection followed by immediate withdrawal, but she had begun to crave these fleeting moments of closeness almost as much as the bond fever. "When will you return?" she asked, hating the need in her voice. "When I can," Vashael replied, already disentangling himself from her embrace. He rose, setting his disordered attire to rights. "Lock the door when I leave. Speak to no one." Giselle sat up, drawing her knees to her chest as she watched him put himself back in order. The formal attire transformed him before her eyes, from the unguarded man of moments ago back to the cold, remote Fae Lord who moved through the castle like a ghost. "What happens if the bond calls again while your guests are still here?" she asked. Vashael paused in fastening his elaborate jacket. "I will feel it, and I will come." With that inadequate reassurance, he moved to the door, pausing as he reached for the handle. For a heartbeat, he looked back at her, something unreadable flickering in the depths of his eyes. "This will pass," he said, though whether he meant the bond fever or Lazarus's unwelcome guests was unclear. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Time passed slowly in her solitude. Servants brought food but no company. Lysandra appeared briefly to light the lamps as darkness fell, her silver eyes full of sympathy. "The feast continues," she reported. "Lord Lazarus has commanded entertainment that may last well into the night." "And Vashael?" Giselle asked. "Our Lord endures," she sighed, "though his patience wears thin." After Lysandra departed, Giselle tried to sleep, but rest eluded her. The bond, though satisfied, maintained a low-level hum in her awareness, like a distant storm on the horizon. Something was different about it, the intensity, the timing, the lingering connection that usually faded more completely once the bond was eased. She had just begun to drift into uneasy slumber when it happened. The mark on her palm flared to life with shocking suddenness, not with the usual gentle warming but with a jolt like lightning striking her hand. Crimson light erupted from the mark, so bright it almost blinded her. A wave of heat crashed through her body, not the gradual building she was accustomed to, but an overwhelming flood that left her gasping. Her vision shimmered at the edges, the room appearing to pulse in rhythm with her racing heart. "Vashael," she rasped. As if summoned by her voice, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost bloomed across the window glass, and her breath misted in the frigid air. The door crashed open. Vashael stood before her, but not the controlled, remote Fae Lord she had come to know. This was a creature of elemental power, his platinum hair floating around his head as if stirred by an unfelt wind, his dark eyes completely black without a hint of white. The mark on his palm blazed with crimson fire that cast nightmarish shadows across his flawless face. "Giselle," he growled, her name transformed into something ancient and powerful in his mouth. He stalked into the room, movements no longer fluid but jerky and uncoordinated, as if he fought against his own body with every step. His formal attire was in disarray, jacket unbuttoned and shirt torn at the neck. "I feel you." His voice was rough and strained. "In my blood, in my bones." Giselle rose from the bed, drawn toward him by an irresistible pull. The moment their fingers touched, magic exploded between them. The crimson light from their marks merged and intensified, surrounding them in a cocoon of ruby radiance that pulsed with their shared heartbeat. The air vibrated with power, the fabric of reality bending around them. Vashael made a sound that was half groan, half snarl as he pulled her against him, his massive body shuddering with each breath. "I tried to resist," he hissed, "during the feast. When I felt it rising again, I nearly tore Lazarus apart when he delayed me with questions." He kissed her like a man starved, and she tasted winter frost and midnight storms on him, the gathered power of 1,000 years. She pressed her marked palm flat against his, and the bond surged between them with such force that they both cried out. He gathered her against him, his hands trembling where they held her. The veins along his forearms stood out like rivers of blue ice, pulsing with power. With a sound that began as a growl and ended as something between a plea and a prayer, he drew her down with him. "I need," he began, his voice fracturing like ice, the words seeming to pain him as they scraped past his throat. "I know," Giselle answered, her hand tightening around his. "I feel it too." When the bond took them fully, it was nothing like the times before. This was not merely two bodies but two beings, the bond throwing the doors of them both wide open. Giselle's senses spilled past the edges of her mortal body, and through the connection fragments of Vashael's vast, ancient consciousness crashed into her, frozen forests where trees of crystalline ice sang with voices like silver bells, centuries of solitude, a loneliness so old it had forgotten its own name. And he, in turn, was overwhelmed by her, the bright, urgent flame of mortal existence, fierce and fleeting and utterly alive. The bond would not release them. Hours blurred together, the fever cresting and never quite breaking, until the room lightened around them and night gave way to dawn, and still neither of them noticed, lost in each other and in the magic that had made them one. The door burst open, revealing Lazarus's tall figure silhouetted against the corridor's light. The Fae noble stood frozen for a moment, emerald eyes widening at the sight before him. Vashael and Giselle wrapped together in the blazing crimson glow of the bond, their joined hands alight between them, his shirt undone and her hair loose, the truth of what bound them impossible to mistake. Chapter 6. The ancient door to Vashael's private chambers burst open, the heavy oak slamming against the stone wall with a crash. Lazarus stood in the doorway, his emerald eyes scanning the opulent room before settling on the massive bed, his perfect features twisting into an expression of shock and disgust. By the endless summer, Lazarus breathed, eyes wide with surprise. So this is what has kept you from your duties as host? A dalliance with a human servant? Vashael moved with inhuman speed, drawing the blanket around Giselle while positioning his massive body between her and the intruder. His dark eyes, still completely black from the bond's influence, fixed on Lazarus with deadly rage. Get out! Each word dropped from his lips like a shard of ice, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Lazarus made no effort to leave, his emerald gaze shifting from Vashael to Giselle, who peered over her mate's shoulder with embarrassment. Seriously, Vashael? Lazarus sneered. Has your isolation driven you to such depths that you find a mortal attractive? What would the court say if they knew the great Lord Vashael, once the pride of the Fae realms, now debases himself with a mortal? Vashael's body tensed. You understand nothing, he growled, the sound barely human. As usual. Oh, I understand perfectly, Lazarus countered, leaning against the doorframe with a smile. 1,000 years of dignity, and the great Lord Vashael throws it all away to play house with a tavern girl. But to abandon your guests for such a trivial indulgence? That shows how far you have truly fallen. Vashael rose, crimson light still pulsing around his massive form. Even with his clothing torn and in disarray, he radiated such power and ancient authority that Lazarus took an involuntary step back. You have worn my hospitality thin, Vashael said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber like distant thunder. Take your friends and leave my lands before dawn. My patience is at an end. The temperature in the room continued to drop, frost patterns spreading across the floor toward Lazarus's feet. Lazarus's face remained passive, but his eyes flashed with fear. The court will hear of this. Indiscretion, he spat. The court, Vashael huffed, has no authority here. This is my domain, governed by my will alone. To emphasize his words, a slab of frozen stone cracked beneath his feet. Lazarus glared at Vashael with disdain, body tense and fists clenched, but Vashael refused to back down, glaring straight back as frost continued to spread across the room. It was Lazarus who looked away first, though his perfect features arranged themselves into a mask of casual amusement. As you wish, old friend, he said with a mocking bow. We shall depart, though I suspect this is not the last you'll hear from the court on this matter. With a final cold glance at Giselle, Lazarus withdrew, closing the door behind him. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft hum of the bond still pulsing between them. Giselle clutched the blanket to her chest, emotions churning within her, embarrassment, anger, and a strange relief that their secret was finally exposed, giving her no reason to lie and hide anymore. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't want to cause trouble for you. Vashael turned to face her. To her surprise, his expression held no anger, no blame, only a strange, fierce intensity she couldn't quite interpret. The opinions of the court mean nothing to me, he said gently, brushing a thumb across her cheek. I have lived centuries without their approval. I do not require it now. Vashael kneeled before her at the edge of the bed. May I, he began, his deep voice hesitant in a way she'd never heard before, show you what it means to be loved by an ancient one? The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. This was not the bond speaking, but Vashael himself. Giselle nodded, her voice caught somewhere between her racing heart and dry throat. Vashael raised both hands, palms upward. From his fingertips, delicate tendrils of silver light began to dance, weaving between his fingers. In the first age, he said softly, when the Fae courts were young and magic flowed freely between realms, we learned to externalize our essence, to share not just presence, but souls. He brought his hands together, and the silver light leaped from his fingers to coil around his wrists, creating intricate patterns that shifted and changed like flowing script in a language too ancient for mortal understanding. It may be, Overwhelming, he said. Tell me if you wish to stop. Giselle leaned forward, fascinated by the luminous display. I'm not afraid, she whispered, though her heart thundered in her chest. Vashael smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually impassive features into something breathtaking. Perhaps you should be, he murmured. He placed his hands on either side of her face, not quite touching, allowing the silver light to make first contact. The moment it brushed her skin, Giselle gasped. It felt like being kissed by starlight, cool and warm at once, sending shivers cascading down her spine. The silver tendrils traced her cheeks before flowing downward, following the column of her throat with exquisite gentleness. Where they touched, her skin awakened to sensations beyond the physical, a kaleidoscope of feeling that transcended mere touch. Colors she had never seen before bloomed behind her closed eyelids. This is soul-sharing, Vashael said, his voice coming from both outside and within her mind. The purest form of connection among my kind. The silver light spread further, wrapping around her like a second skin, and Vashael's voice guided her through it. In the ancient days, he murmured, we learned to open ourselves entirely to another, to hide nothing. With each breath he exhaled, tiny snowflakes formed and drifted through the air, until the whole chamber filled with a slow, silent snowfall. May I join with you completely? He asked, his voice pulsing with power. Yes, she breathed. What followed was unlike anything she had known. Not bodies but souls laid bare, the boundary between them dissolving until she could no longer tell where she ended and he began. Let go, he whispered. I will catch you. And she did, surrendering completely as the soul bond carried them both somewhere beyond the reach of the ancient room, the falling snow, and the long centuries that had kept him alone. I never knew, she whispered, somewhere in the heart of it, that it could be like this. And then her mind was her own again, and she sank back onto the bed, spent and trembling, wrung out in a way she had never felt before. Vashael settled beside her, his arms still wrapped around her. His massive chest heaved as he tried to recover his breath. The snow was melting, the last of it swirling around the ceiling. Thank you, he breathed, pressing a kiss to her brow. For everything. Giselle couldn't find the words to reply. All she could manage was a contented murmur as she nestled her face into his chest, his heart beat slow and steady beneath her ear. Sleep took her before she could speak, but it didn't matter. She knew that in the morning, he would still be there, and that was all she needed. 2 months had passed since Lazarus departed the castle, taking his unwelcome entourage and their prying eyes with him. Autumn had descended on the enchanted lands, transforming the gardens into a tapestry of colors no mortal realm could match, leaves that shimmered with metallic luster, flowers that sang softly as they prepared for winter slumber, streams that ran with water the color of liquid amber. For Giselle, the passing weeks had been a strange mixture of peace and growing unease. The bond had remained unusually quiet since that night, the crimson mark on her palm glowing with constant gentle warmth, rather than the urgent pulsing demand that had characterized their early days together. No longer did she wake drenched in sweat, consumed by fever that only Vashael's touch could quench. No longer were they swept together with desperate urgency wherever the bond struck them. It isn't right, Vashael said, pacing the length of her chambers with agitation. His platinum hair hung loose around his shoulders, catching the morning light that streamed through tall windows. The bond should not be dormant like this. Not for so long. Giselle watched him from her position by the window, where she had been attempting to read one of the ancient tomes Lysandra had provided to help her understand Fae customs. The book remained open in her lap, its intricate illustrations seeming to move when viewed from the corner of the eye. Perhaps it changed into something new again, she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the wave of nausea that had become her constant morning companion. Maybe the bond is just different for each couple. Vashael paused, his pacing, dark eyes fixing on her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see through to her soul. The sacred bond has existed for 10,000 years. In all the recorded instances, it has maintained its rhythm for decades at minimum. Never has it quieted after mere months. He resumed his restless movement, a caged predator too powerful for the space containing him. And there are other concerns. Giselle knew what he meant without explanation. The strange illness that had overtaken her body showed no signs of abating. Each morning brought waves of nausea that left her weak and trembling. Food that had once delighted her now turned her stomach, certain scents becoming unbearable. Her body, once strong from years of serving in her father's tavern, now tired after the smallest exertion. I'm fine, she lied, pressing a hand against her queasy stomach. Just adjusting to Fae food, perhaps. Vashael's expression made it clear he didn't believe her. You are not fine, he said flatly. Your scent has changed. Your aura shifts color at odd moments, and you cannot keep even the simplest meal down. He moved to stand before her. To her surprise, he knelt, bringing his face level with hers. Giselle, he said, I need you to tell me exactly how you feel. No pretense. No bravery. The truth. The gentleness in his voice broke something within her. Tears welled in her eyes. I feel strange, she said. The words tumbling out after weeks of denial. Weak in a way I've never experienced. My body doesn't seem like my own anymore. Food tastes wrong. Smells are too intense. I'm tired all the time, yet I can't sleep properly. And? Vashael urged. I feel something moving inside me, she whispered. Not constantly, but sometimes. Like a flutter below my stomach. Vashael went utterly still, the way only an immortal being could, not just motionless but somehow absent from time itself for a heartbeat or two. He placed his large hand on her stomach. The mark on his palm flared briefly, crimson light spilling between his fingers. Beneath his hand, Giselle felt it again. That strange flutter, but stronger now, as if responding to his presence. As I suspected, Vashael breathed. What? Giselle demanded, fear curling around her heart. What's happening to me? The bond has quieted, because it has accomplished its purpose. I don't understand. Giselle's hand moved to her stomach where the fluttering sensation had subsided. Life, Vashael said simply, the single word hanging in the air between them. You carry life within you. A child. Our child. The room seemed to tilt around her. You mean with child, yes. Half human, half fae. But I thought, Giselle began, confusion evident in her voice. Such crossings are rare, but not impossible. Vashael began to pace again as he spoke. Like a horse and a donkey, whose joining brings forth a mule. The offspring are healthy, but they cannot have children of their own. Half fae exist between worlds, neither fully mortal nor truly immortal. It is the price of bridging realms that were never meant to join. Giselle's hand remained on her stomach, processing her new reality. A child? Her child. Vashael's child, growing within her. But I will grow old and die. Her mortality hit her with renewed force. Our child will watch me age, wither. Hush. Vashael returned to kneel before her. He took both her hands in his. Let's not speak of such things. Not now. Let's just enjoy this time that we have together. Giselle looked up and froze. Wet tracks marked Vashael's perfect face. Tears, actual tears, sliding down the sculpted cheekbones of his perfect face. Vashael, she whispered, reaching up to touch his cheek, to capture one of those precious tears on her fingertip. I never thought this would happen, he said softly. In 1,000 years, I never imagined. Words failed him, but the wonder in his eyes spoke volumes. Giselle leaned forward, her lips finding his in a kiss. Not the hungry, desperate claiming of the bond fever, but something tender, something chosen rather than compelled. As morning sunlight spilled through the ancient windows, bathing them both in golden radiance, Giselle felt the flutter again beneath her skin, their impossible child making its presence known. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The bond that had begun as an obligation, a burden to be endured, had transformed into something neither of them could have anticipated. Not just a magical connection, not just a child born of impossible union, but something that might be called love. As Vashael drew her into his arms, holding her close, this time not from magical compulsion but from genuine desire, Giselle surrendered to the strange, wonderful future that awaited them. The ancient Fae Lord who had once seemed so cold, so remote, now held her as if she were the most precious treasure in all the realms. Thank you for reading Mated to the Ancient Fae. This is a fade to black version where the spicy scenes have been removed. To read the explicit version, please visit www.beatrixsteam.com/fae. Find more adult spicy stories and free ebooks at beatrixsteam.com.